So I've been using the Tamron 18-300 APS-C all-in-one zoom lens along with my Sony APS-C camera, which is the A6700, for about 2 years now, and this lens has been sitting on my camera for 90% of the times, because most of the times when I go out, when I'm traveling, when I'm doing casual wildlife or nature or landscape photography, videography, this lens pretty much does everything that I want. It covers almost all my needs, and in this video I'm gonna talk about this lens in detail and give you my user experience and my user feedback about this lens. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about this lens and why I bought it. Then I'm gonna talk about its real world usage, a little bit of pros and cons about this lens, what I like, what I dislike. Most importantly, I'm also gonna talk about who this lens is for. And lastly, we'll also discuss a little bit about its competitors and what are the different other options available in the market. So before we start off, if you don't know me, my name is Tanmay Sakpal. I make tech and gadget reviews, especially around photo and video. I have quite a lot of camera gear. I have lights, I have microphones, drones, lenses, cameras, etc, etc. So if you're into that kind of stuff, do check out this channel and definitely subscribe and turn on the notifications. I generally only make videos about the tech and gadget that I personally use or I personally think is useful. So it's not about any random tech gadget that I make, but most of the videos and most of the gadgets that I've covered on this channel, I've personally used and I personally think they are quite useful and maybe useful for you guys too. Alright, so with that introduction, let's talk about the Tamron 18-300 lens. So this is that lens, and currently right now I'm shooting with my Sony 1.4-15G lens, which is a prime lens, and this is really good because it's a very fast 1.4 aperture lens and it gives me that blurry background as well as a little bit of wide angle. This is a 18-300 APS-C lens, meaning on a full frame camera it would be around 27.5 to 450. So that's a huge focal length, and this is a chunky lens for a APS-C camera. It weighs around 600 grams. I'll put the tech specs on the screen. And let's talk a little bit about this lens. So this has a extending barrel. In fact, it has 2 barrel extensions, and it goes from all the way to 18 to all the way to 300 in APS-C terms, and when it comes to full frame it is 27.5 to 450, and it almost extends to become twice its size. It's a huge lens. Yeah, there's that. So why did I go for this lens? So when I first bought my camera, which is the A6700 2 years ago, I bought it with the sole intention of learning photography and videography, and because I'm interested in gadgets and especially cameras like action cams, full frame cameras, interchangeable lens cameras, 360 cameras, etc, etc. So that's something that I actually like, and I always wanted a camera. But when I bought this camera, the first thing that hit me is I need to have a lens for this camera which will pretty much cover most of the things that I do, which is casual photography, landscape photography, nature photography, wildlife, and travel photography. So all-in-one zoom lens made complete sense, and that's what steered me to buy this Tamron 18-300 lens, because of its huge focal range. So I knew that I could take a wide shot at 18mm, and if I wanted to zoom in on an object or subject, let's say it's a bird which is far away from me, so I can zoom in and get that telephoto kind of shot. So that was my thinking, and that's what made me select this lens. And as a beginner, I didn't want to get a very specialized lens, like a very fast lens, kind of like this one. This one I bought because I just wanted to make these videos where I'm sitting home and shooting the videos on a wider angle with a faster aperture, because in the home setting this lens is not gonna be that wide enough because I sit in a small room, and this is also not that fast. It starts from f3.5, which is quite slow, so you need a lot of light. And in an indoor setup, this prime lens suits my needs, hence I have this extra lens just for these videos. But whenever I'm outdoor, I only carry pretty much this lens at all times. Exception is that when I want to do night photography or night sky or landscape photography during the night time, that is when I use this APS-C f1.4 15mm lens. So yeah, that was my whole thinking, that I wanted one lens that will do everything for me, even if it is not a specialized lens like a portrait lens or a telephoto lens. This is having the zoom range of 18, which is a standard wide field of view, and it can go all the way to 300, which is like in the telephoto territory, right? So that was my intention behind buying this lens, and so far in the 2 years of using it has definitely served me very well. Most of the photos I've probably clicked around 2,000 to 3,000 photos so far, lot of videos also on this lens, and most of the times I am always satisfied. So talking a little bit about the specifications of this lens, this is a variable aperture lens, meaning as I zoom in, the aperture values increases, meaning that you need more light, and variable aperture generally are considered inferior compared to fixed aperture lenses. We have some zoom lenses which are fixed aperture also, like the Sigma 18-50 f2.5, which is a standard zoom lens which has a maximum aperture of f2.8. You can have a constant aperture basically at f2.8. so there's that. Then there are other zoom lenses also, but the focal range is limited. With buying a lens like this is an all-in-one zoom lens, and the reason why we call it all-in-one is because it addresses all the different focal lengths in one single lens, and you don't have to keep on changing the lens all the time when you're outdoors. And that was another major reason why I wanted to have an all-in-one zoom lens, because once I put this lens on my camera and when I'm outdoors, I generally don't change the lens, because I don't like to do that. That's an extra tedious work that you have to do, and secondly, when you're outdoors in the harsh environments, you don't want dust and debris getting inside your sensor or getting inside your lens. So I'm very conscious about that. So that's another reason. So talking about this lens, this is a very hefty lens. Okay, it's around 620 grams, which is like quite the bulk, and when you put it on your APS-C camera, it feels like a full frame setup. So there's that. Apart from that, this lens also has lens stabilization, which is another amazing thing about this lens, because when you're at that extreme telephoto end at 300, which is 450 when you convert it into full frame equivalent, that is when the lens stabilization comes into picture, and it stabilizes the video and photos really well. I have some videos which I'll showcase you which are shot at 450, and without even applying any post stabilization, the stabilization naturally is really good. And if you have steady hands, which I unfortunately don't, the video footage can be even more stable. Along with that, if you're just doing a little bit of editing in post, you can just apply the basic stabilization in any video editor, and that would give you like gimbal like footage, which is surprising, because at 300mm telephoto, even small shakes can create huge vibrations. But because of the optical image stabilization, OSS, inside this, they call it VC, which is I think vibration control. That is just the technical term that Tamron uses. In Sony we have OSS, which is optical steady shot in the lenses. And then my A6700 fortunately also has in-body image stabilization, meaning the sensor stabilization. So that stabilization along with the stabilization inside the lens works in tandem to create a very stable shot. So that was another reason that I got this lens, and that's something that I really like. Apart from that, even though I am kind of saying that this is a very hefty lens, for the focal range that it offers, in a full frame equivalent it is 27 to 450, it is still a much tiny and travel friendly lens. And since it's an all-in-one lens, this is the only lens that I generally carry when I'm on my travel trips. I don't have to have 2 or 3 lenses packed up, which gets even more bulky. Okay, so even though this is a hefty lens when it comes to APS-C setups, given the huge focal range, this is still a compact lens. It has a 67mm filter thread, so commonly used filter threads can also be fit on this. It has a lock switch which locks the zooming. Even without that, the zoom actually is quite rigid, in fact almost too rigid. When I'm trying to change the focal range going from wide to telephoto, I have to put a little bit more pressure than I would have liked, but I guess that is so that it doesn't droop. You can see without the lock also the lens does not creep, there is no lens creep, and it's a very solidly built lens. No complaints about the build quality. It's been 2 years and it is almost as good as brand new. Of course I do take care of my lenses a lot, and I'm very careful when I'm outdoors, so I've kept the lenses in its pristine quality. So there's that. Apart from that, let's talk about the real world usage about photography and videography. So talking about photography, the photos that are captured are amazing. It has very good sharpness, even though all-in-one zoom lenses are criticized and considered inferior when it comes to image quality. In my opinion, as an absolute beginner, as an absolute novice person who takes photos and videos for casual use, I'm not a professional or I don't do commercial shoots. I just do it for myself and for my social media. So in my personal opinion, as a beginner, this lens is sharp enough. This lens has enough contrast, enough details, and even at 300mm, the sharpness is quite up to the mark. Okay, so I'll put some photos which I have shot at 300, and especially when it comes to bird photography, you can see literally the feathers of the birds at 300mm. So that's plenty sharp. When it comes to the chromatic aberrations and the irregularities of the image, yes, those exist a little bit, but I'm no technical expert to comment on that. As I said, if you want those technical understandings of the image, those image charts and comparisons, there are many other tech experts and reviewers who have done a great job about that. But I'm just gonna talk here about my experience of using this lens instead of getting into the numbers and the charts and all those nitty-gritty things. In my personal opinion, the images are very, very sharp, especially during the daytime. Now, do understand this is more of a daylight lens or shoot in the outdoors kind of setup where there is ample amount of light. That is because this is a very slow lens. It starts from f3.5 to 6.3, and since it's an APS-C lens, the sensor is already small compared to a full frame setup, so you need quite a lot of light. And as soon as the light gets lower, after the day, as soon as the evening and night time turns up, or if you're in a heavy dense rainforest where there is less amount of light, that is when this lens a little bit struggles, because you need higher ISOs and your shutter speed needs to get down. You need to play around with the exposure triangle to get the right exposure. And even then, I would not recommend this lens for anyone who does photography during the evening time or night time or early morning time. That is when you need a faster aperture lens. Talking about the videography, again, really good performance, especially with the optical stabilization which is inbuilt inside this lens. So you get very, very stable shots. Because it's a variable aperture, when you zoom in on your subject, obviously the light gets lower and you have to raise your exposure or lower your shutter speed to compensate for that. So you have to keep that in mind. When you're zooming in both photography and videography side of things, the zoom ring I think is quite stiff for my liking. Maybe they made it purposely because they might have thought that over the course of time it would smoothen out, but I feel it's still quite stiff for my use or for my liking. I would have liked it to have a little bit more of a smoother zoom. It has that stiff stepping zoom kind of, it's not very fluid, it's not very smooth, and I always struggle when I'm zooming in on the subject, but I've gotten used to it. It's nothing to complain a lot about, but yeah, I would have liked if the zoom would have been a little bit more smoother. When it comes to the focus ring, I rarely use the manual focus. I'm almost shooting in autofocus most of the times because Sony has amazing autofocus. Might as well use it all the time. But it has a very tiny zoom ring. It's quite smooth enough. I've rarely used it, as I said. I've done a little bit of macro kind of photography, and by the way, this has 0.x magnification kind of macro, so 1 to 0.5 magnification. So you can get quite close with this lens, especially at the 18mm length, and get a very close-up shots. I'll put 1 or 2 close-up shots that I've taken of insects, and you can see I've got very close with this lens. So this is another superpower, literally all-in-one zoom lens. You can do a little bit of macro, obviously not a proper dedicated macro lens, but you can do macro photography with this, which is again extra icing on the cake. Now in both photography and videography, the autofocus works flawlessly. There is no lag, and of course the newer Sony camera A6700 has already one of the best autofocus in the industry. So there are no complaints about that. Even though this is a third-party Tamron lens, Tamron is a very reputed brand. Tamron and Sigma are the two big brands which provide third-party lenses to Sony E-mount, and they're really, really good. There is literally no complaint. I have tried different autofocus settings and almost all of them work flawlessly. No complaints about that. When it comes to balancing this on a gimbal, then this lens is not for you, because obviously when you zoom in, the entire center of gravity of the whole camera plus the lens shifts. So this is not something that you would put on a gimbal as a setup, so that's not recommended. And yeah, that's about the overall photo and video side of things. ergonomics are good. This is a hefty lens in the hand. When it comes to the build quality, as I said, it feels very solidly built. Lot of chunkiness to it, lot of rigidness to it. I've never really dropped it in the 2 years that I've owned this, and I hope I never drop it. But yeah, I think this lens can take quite the beating. So far, as I said, this is a 2-year-old lens, but if you just hold this particular lens, it will feel that I've just bought it yesterday. That's how well I've actually maintained it also. And yeah, overall this is a great all-in-one travel lens. Now coming to the pros and cons, the first obvious pro about this lens, yeah, it is a all-in-one zoom lens, literally going from 18 to 300, covering all the different focal range. Even if it is at the cost of the variable aperture, you get a lot of versatility. And as a beginner, I really wanted that, because when you're learning photography, you don't want to be restricted with limited focal range. Although there is a contradictory statement over here where people have recommended to not buy all-in-one zoom lenses and go with prime lenses or standard zooms which have a constant aperture value, basically, so that you move yourself to do the actual framing. With this, all I have to do is zoom in and I get the frame shot. I don't have to move here and there. I don't have to be a lot creative. But yeah, it makes the process a little bit easy in my personal opinion. I don't have to keep on moving here and there or keep moving ahead to get the perfect shot. I can simply zoom in onto the subject to get the frame properly. It makes my work easy when you're outdoors, when you're traveling. My personal usage is that I don't want to be a lot more technical and I don't want to think a lot to take my shot. I just want to frame it properly. I just want to point and get a great shot, and this is what this lens does. Hence I recommend this for beginners in my personal opinion. We'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, the biggest pro of this lens is its versatility, and biggest plus point of this lens is its zooming capabilities and its versatility. So another pro to consider is, even though I've said that this is a chunky lens, but for the focal range that it offers, this is still a very compact lens compared to many other full frame setups giving the same focal range. And that's the beauty of APS-C, because you can still stay quite compact and quite light, and this makes my travel so much more easier, because I don't want to be carrying those huge bulky full frame lenses, and I can actually do wildlife photography with this one single all-in-one zoom lens, and I get amazing shots even at 300mm. Another pro is the actual image quality. I have really no complaints. In fact, I feel the images are very sharp, at least to my liking. And as I said, I'm not a professional. I'm not someone who does commercial shoots, professional shoots. So very high expectations from this lens is something that I don't have. But the images that I have seen personally with my eyes are really satisfying to me. And of course, you're seeing this on social media, the images that I'm showing you. So obviously they are heavily compressed. But even when I put the videos and photos on my 4K screen, I see the videos being very crisp. I see the photos being very sharp. And it has great color, great contrast, and all the other things that make the image beautiful. I think this lens produces those amazing images. And lastly, the pro that we talked about, its macro capabilities. That's a pro that no one talks about this lens. And I think the 0.5x magnification, where you can get very close, almost close enough where the edge of the lens is actually touching the subject and the focus is still there on that object. That's something that's really making it truly versatile and truly all-in-one, where you can do a little bit of macro. And since you can crop in, even if you are getting 0.5x magnification, you can later on crop in on the image in post, because you have a lot of resolution with the APS-C camera, which is A6700. I think I get 26 megapixels, which is plenty enough to zoom in on the subject and still have a lot of details. So I've done a little bit of macro photography. As I said, I'll show you some photos and you be the judge. I think it's a really good option. So yeah, those were the pros. Now let's talk about the cons. I know I've been praising this lens quite a lot, but this is by no means a perfect lens. The very first drawback is, yes, it is a variable aperture, meaning as you zoom in, the aperture value increases and you have to change the exposure triangle. You have to either raise the ISO or reduce the shutter speed to compensate for the light. Otherwise, you'll get a darker image at the telephoto end compared to what you get at the wide end. So there's that is obviously the biggest drawback some of you may have, because let's say you're doing mostly night photography, then this lens is definitely not for you. Okay, you need a faster lens, you need a constant aperture lens, especially f2.8 or lower than that. so you'll have to limit your options when it comes to the zooming capabilities. So there's that. Apart from that, at 300mm, I think the lens is plenty sharp, but when you compare it with a photo shot at something like 20 or 50mm and compare it with the photo shot at 300mm, there is a little bit of loss of sharpness, but that little bit loss you'll never really realize when you're watching it on social media. This is when I actually pixel peep, when I put those images on my 4K monitor and I pixel peep on them. That's when I feel the sharpness is a little bit lower when you're shooting at 300mm, but nothing to complain about. But that's something that I would want to mention as a con over here. Apart from that, this is a hefty lens, and yes, I said in the pros that this is a compact lens, but it is not as compact as you would like, and it surely has quite the heft and bulk on it. So you'll always notice this on you, and when I'm traveling, this is the lens that sits on my camera 90% of the time. And when I'm having the camera and the lens and it's hanging on my strap, or it is attached to my backpack strap mount, it definitely weighs on me. I do constantly notice the weight, so maybe I would have liked a little bit lighter lens, but I don't think that's even possible because of the zooming capabilities that it offers. I'm not even sure if it is possible technically or even by physics. I think they've done a great job to keep the weight low, but by no means this is a small and tiny APS-C lens. APS-C lenses are much more smaller and compact than this, but just because of the zooming capabilities of this lens, that is the reason why it is a very hefty lens. So that's another con that you could consider as a negative thing. You can consider it as a positive thing as well as a negative thing. And lastly, this, even though it's a very solidly built lens, it is a little bit plasticky feeling, and even though I've used it for 2 years, I have no complaints about the longevity. But compared to many other more expensive lenses or premium lenses which are completely built out of metal, this is more of a plastic composite being used. So I don't know how long this will sustain, but so far so good. I have no complaints with that. So yeah, this was a little bit of pros and cons, and now let's talk about the competitors, right? Because if you are in the market to buy a all-in-one zoom lens, obviously you need to study other lenses also and pick the lens that is best suited for you. So this lens, if you really want the all-in-one capabilities, meaning the wide to telephoto focal range and versatility, then this lens definitely is there. But if you are looking for a true competitor to this lens, this is the 18-300. Sigma has just launched a 16-300, meaning it's 2mm wider on the wide end, and that actually is noticeable because 16, when you convert it into full frame equivalent, that would go to 24, and this is going till 27-28. So 24mm, you can actually kind of do a little bit of logging also. It's wide enough to log. Even this is wide enough, but you'll have to kind of hand hold this lens and stretch out your hand as far as possible, and that would strain your hands. But when it comes to the Sigma, which is newly launched by the way, and hence I'm mentioning it to you guys, you can check out that lens, which is going from 16-300. So on the tele end, it is exactly as long as this lens. When you compare them side by side, most of the specifications are pretty much comparable. I've personally not used that lens. That is a lens which I think has launched just a few weeks ago, so I don't really have it. But Sigma, as I said, is one of the most famous brands when it comes to lenses, and they make amazing Sony lenses. So I think the quality would be up to the mark, probably even better than this lens, because this is an old lens. This was, I think, I don't know when it was launched, but I think it is I think it was launched in what? They do have the year when it was launched, right? I think they do put the dates on them, but yeah, I'll put the date when it was launched. But I think it was like at least 3 to 4 years ago, and since this Sigma lens is recently launched, it definitely would be a little bit better compared to this lens. So do have a look at that. Another option that you have is the Sony is offering, which is 18-135, and 135 is not very long on the tele end, but it is a very, very compact lens, and it's a Sony lens, so obviously the quality is going to be up to the mark. Again, it's a variable aperture lens. Most importantly, it's not that versatile enough, but it is much more lighter and compact compared to this lens. So these are the 3 all-in-one zoom lenses that you have when you're talking about APS-C zoom lenses for the Sony system. So you guys can compare them and make the choice based on your needs and what you are going to do with it. But if you want one lens that I would recommend, that would be, I think, to consider the Sigma 16 to 300 because of the 2mm wideness on the wide end. Other than that, most of the things I think are going to be comparable. I don't personally have it, so I can't really give you my real feedback. This lens I've been using for 2 years. I have literally no complaints with this. Everything works flawlessly with this lens. So if you're in the market to buy this lens, I would say if you need an all-in-one zoom lens, you'll not go wrong with this one. So yeah, that was my overall user experience of the Tamron 18-300 APS-C all-in-one zoom lens. And I know that's a mouthful, but this lens has really helped me do photography and videography in a more easier way because it just sits on my camera all the time and it gives me a lot of zooming capability, a lot of versatility to do all sorts of photography, be it landscape, be it city photography, city life if I want to document the city life, if I want to do a little bit of wildlife, and I do quite a lot of wildlife photography where I photograph a lot of birds and wild animals in the wild, and the zooming capabilities really help me. So I've been satisfied. Thumbs up to this lens. If you are in the market to buy lenses, I will share the affiliate links of these lenses in the video description. Definitely check them out. If you really want to purchase them, do check out the links in the video description. If you buy the lenses from those links, that would definitely give me a little bit of kickback at no cost to you, and obviously the discounts that already exist on the lenses will all be exactly the same. It just helps me to keep on creating this content on this channel. Alright, so that's it for this video, guys. That was my user review of the Tamron 18-300. Let me know in the comments how this video was. If you have any queries, if you have any questions, if you have any suggestions, put them in the comment section. I'll try to answer them as fast as possible. And this is Tanmay Sakpal signing off. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Peace.